Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how I look at narcissism and cluster B and addictions and maybe even ADHD as reflecting a kind of a degraded or incomplete spirituality. Okay. Um, I sort of talked about it in the last video, but there's always more to say and there's always more nuance that I apparently am very good at overlooking. And of course, as I think about it more, I really think that spirituality is a very good angle for understanding any kind of behavioral problem, any kind of a personality problem or addictions or even ADD. Now, I realize that we may be dealing with neurological abnormalities. In other words, people may be not neurotypical. You can be neurologically atypical. Okay, so but I still think that spirituality is sort of like a good reference point, okay, especially when we have atypical neurology, okay, because in the way I look at it, I think spirituality is something that even neurally atypical people can actually use as a resource to actually improve their lives. And I think spirituality is something that can be developed regardless of our level of neurotypical, how neurotypical we are. Okay. And in a sense, I think that maybe spirituality may even be the common denominator that sort of can unite people with different neurologies. Okay. And so neurology, I don't think of it as being a block to spirituality. It doesn't prevent spirituality, but different neurologies may challenge our spirituality in different ways. Okay, so I think it's instead of looking at neurology as like a cancellation of spirituality, which I think is doesn't really make sense as we look more into this. Instead of looking at our neurology as potentially, like, say, a cancellation of our spirituality, I think unless we have serious brain injury, unless we have a massive stroke or some kind of lesion in the brain that actually shuts off like whole portions of the brain, as long as we're not dealing with, like, say, missing parts of the brain, okay, if it's not that we're missing parts of the brain, but let's say maybe instead, maybe parts of our brain are making too much noise, okay, or parts of our brain are dominating and preventing other parts of our brain from functioning more, okay. In those situations, I think we should look at spirituality as more of a challenge, sort of an sort of an environment. Let's say, well, we can look at spirituality as an area in which we can find, let's say, a challenge to improve. And of course, the first thing I'm going to say is, anybody who tells me about brain scans of psychopaths and how they have very little activity in the prefrontal, whatever, okay, does that mean that they have the equivalent of having, like, say, no active, zero? Okay. In other words, if you see low activity in a CAT scan, in some kind of, like, say, a CAT scan or whatever, MRI, whatever, you do a brain scan of a psychopath and you see very little activity in certain parts of the brain. Does that mean it's the same thing as if that part of the brain were missing? Okay, I don't think so. I think low activity just means other parts of the brain are dominating so much that it doesn't leave a lot of, let's say, it doesn't leave a lot of, I'm going to say bandwidth. I mean, it doesn't leave a lot of bandwidth to open up other parts of the brain. Okay, so in other words, I can understand that there are situations and sometimes even severe conditions where, we just haven't developed a lot of circuits, processing circuits that involve different parts of the brain. I understand that. But I think that unless we've actually had like a tumor or, like, say, a lesion that actually has killed that part of the brain where it's absolutely just gone, I think we need to look at these more as challenges, and that it may be that spirituality may be the vehicle to sort of help open up, let's say, different circuits and the use of different parts of the mind. Okay. Now, I can't prove anything about what I'm going to say, but I think that the way I'd like to define spirituality, I think it's possible to define spirituality in such a way that I think spiritual practice may have the effect of opening up, let's say, circuits in the mind that we're not used to activating. Okay. Now, this is just this is just speculation, but I think speculation, it's like exploration. It's always good to explore, because you may accidentally find something. Okay, so what I'm proposing is, exploration with the hope of finding things, and getting into new places that may help get around some of the things that we're observing in the brain scans. Okay, so I don't look at the brain scan of a psychopath and saying, oh, they're missing the frontal lobe. No, they got their frontal lobe. The blood is flowing through it. Those neurons are alive. It's just that somehow the psychopath, let's say, gets into a habit where they're not using the full brain. Okay, and maybe parts of the brain are not getting a lot of use because maybe other parts of the brain are giving too much noise or occupying too much bandwidth, let's say, or let's say processing resources, however you want to call it. So in any case, so basically, and this is just speculative. Okay, I think I'm someone who just believes in explorational experimentation. Okay, because I think that there nobody really knows how to manipulate the brain. The brain's not a computer. We don't have like a keyboard where we can just program the brain and we have like universal like brain languages to, nobody knows the machine language of the brain. So because none of us have, like, say, a keyboard and a let's say a machine language to program the brain, we have to use sort of our own phenomenological resources to explore and try different techniques. Okay, obviously psychology is full of techniques. Something very interesting is like, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, but we should also just explore all kinds of things in our regular lives, including spirituality. Okay, to see if through, let's say, trial and error, we may end up sort of expanding sort of the use of all the parts of our mind, and maybe developing areas where we may be deficient or may have very low functioning in certain parts of our brain. And again, I'm not saying that I know anything. I'm just saying that, why not try? Why not try? If we know that parts of our brain are not actually dead, if it's not brain death, if it's not that there's no blood flowing through those parts of the brain, if it's not that we have, like, say, dead neurons in those part of the brain or whatever, I mean, as long as we have the neurons and as long as we got the blood flow and the potential, I think we should look at spirituality as, I think, an area, and no guarantees, right? No guarantees, but we should look at spirituality as an area where potentially we could maybe develop, let's say, more use of our mind, and even maybe a deeper sense of identity. Okay. So what do I mean by spirituality? And of course, I struggle with this definition. So, I may revise my definition as I spend more time thinking about it. And, there's never a final definition. So anything I say, it's not like I've landed on a final definition. But sometime lately I've been thinking that spirituality could be seen as, and this is just a working definition. Okay, we could look at spirituality as sort of like basically the having difficulty, right? Okay. We could look at spirituality as basically the aspect of our experience that is in appreciation. Okay, like the different, let's say, orbits of appreciation, the different landscapes of appreciation. Basically, if we think of our mind as being like vistas, when I say vista, it's like the view, different points of view, different ways of seeing. Mentally, we can sort of imagine ourselves like at a mountaintop view, maybe from space, looking at the Earth. There's different vistas that we can sort of empathize with or sort of, relate to. Maybe looking over, like, say, a whole city or just a city block, or maybe just like say the block where I live or the neighborhood, or let's say just in my house, or let's say at the family level, just different scopes of, let's say, vista, different panorama scopes, basically. And if we could think of spirituality as being just all the different scopes and vistas of appreciation, okay? And sort of spirituality is maybe how our level of appreciation, okay, not just attention. It's interesting how in psychology we talk so much about attention. Why does psychology always choose the most kind of like, I want to say almost like weak sauce, kind of like the weak sauce version of what is our real potential. Why do we talk about attention as opposed to appreciation? Isn't appreciation so much of a richer version of what we mean to say when we say attention? I just think it's funny how psychology just always defaults to these very kind of I would just say these very flat kind of it's like tire without air, kind of like flat tire, this sort of flat tire way of describing human experience, as opposed to a more exalted, a more noble way of describing the human experience. Sometimes I wonder if psychology doesn't have kind of a chronic low self-esteem about how it renders the human in its vision. The vision of psychology. I don't know if it presents maybe kind of a flat tire version of the human psychology, human mind. And so, when I think of spirituality, I'm not thinking of levels of attention. I'm thinking of levels of appreciation. Okay, I think it's a richer sense of what we're really capable of as people. And so if you really think about it, all human beings are naturally spiritual. Okay, we all have naturally at some point in our lives the ability to have not just attention, but also appreciation at different levels of vista, different vista landscape, let's say scopes. And the scopes are, broad scope, the world, it's the whole world, the whole universe, the cosmic, the worldly, the continental, you know what I mean? For every continent, for every country, in the national, municipal, provincial, municipal, neighborhood, let's say district level, family, and then maybe just like say nuclear family, and then maybe one's own individual, or just my individual life with where my close friends or close, people I have close relationships with. And so we see those different scopes, basically, broad scopes narrowing down to the smaller scopes, and each one presents a different sort of horizon, a different panoramic vista, basically. And so you could think of spirituality as being sort of like just the whole collection, the whole sort of agglomeration of our ability or our experience in appreciation at the different levels of scope, basically the different ranges of scope, from the broadest cosmic all the way down to the most personal. And then, on some abstract level, you could even think like microscopic, subatomic, whatever, on some level. And then also, there's another scope that we all have, which is the fantasy scope, our orbit of fantasy. A lot of people don't really like to be troubled by the clinical reality of just the world outside, and they like to think more about, like, say, their fantasy world or the fictional world. And all these things are different, let's say, vista scapes, but these are basically just landscapes. And if you think about it, the human mind is basically, the human phenomenology is basically just a whole combination, a whole agglomeration of different landscapes, cosmic, worldly, continental, national, provincial, municipal. It's not hard to imagine, but I think it's important to understand that spirituality can be seen as the different levels of appreciation on different panorama levels. Okay, and so all of us have that. So there's nobody in the world who isn't brain damaged. Okay, let's exclude people who have real brain damage. Now let's just talk about regular people, regardless of whether they're neurotypical. But people who have their whole brain or most of their brain, whether you're neurotypical or not, you don't have to be neurotypical. All of us have some experience with different levels of appreciation for different ranges of panorama vista, cosmic, earthly, continental, oceanic, national, provincial, municipal, personal, family, and then also, like, say, fantasy, our own fantasy, shared fantasy. We have let's say there are cultural fantasies, fantasies, like Christianity is a cultural fantasy. Then you have personal fantasies, or let's say maybe like subcultural fantasies. Like say UFO enthusiasts or people that love Star Trek. They have their own kind of subcultural fantasy, collective fantasy, and then we have personal fantasy. So there are all these different levels of, like say, panoramas for different levels of appreciation. Okay, so all of that to me is the kind of the universe of spirituality. Okay, and so basically, if we want to question our own spirituality, what we're really questioning is basically the level of appreciation at the different levels of panorama vista. And we have to all face that we may have certain preferences. We may we may just have a tendency to prefer more personal, more localized, more close to my, let's say, the closer orbits. Maybe I may just have a preference for, like say, my household, my family, my personal, and I kind of don't like to think too much about, like say, the national or the neighborhood level. And then I might have, like say, a low appreciation even at the continental level. But let's say for some reason I love the cosmic, just because we just may have our different preferences. Oh, I love cosmology, but I'm not really big on, like say, politics, but I also like my family, whatever. We all have our own sort of areas where we have more appreciation, and then some areas where we have less appreciation. So, none of us have a perfect spirituality, but all of us have spirituality. Okay. The other thing is that maybe we may have inconsistent spirituality where, let's say, I love, let's say, the cosmic, and I love the earthly, and I love forests, and I love rivers, and I have a great appreciation. But when I'm really attracted to somebody, or I'm involved in, like, say, some kind of pleasure-seeking behavior or some distraction, or let's say if somebody makes me really upset and I get really angry, suddenly I get this flood. And suddenly I'm just consumed with the incident of the moment. And suddenly I have no appreciation for any panorama vista, and my spirituality is basically just dumped, and that is a spiritual experience. In other words, that's the sort of the non-constancy of spirituality, that it's not a constant. And some of us have, like say, very selective appreciation where we can appreciate things sort of with undivided attention at each level of appreciation. And as we appreciate one level, we sort of forget the other level. And then maybe other people are able to have different appreciations at different levels, but they maintain the overall context of a broad spirituality. So our level of context stability, in the sense of having, let's say, if I'm appreciating things at the close level, let's say at the level of my garden, let's say I have a garden, appreciating the plants, or let's say maybe I enjoy cooking, gardening, whatever. If I get really into those levels of appreciation, I may lose in certain moments where I'm really engrossed in those levels. I may lose my context of the overall spirituality that I believe I have, and so our level of context stability, especially with the cosmic, the national, the continental, all those things, they may kind of dissipate at different moments as we're, let's say, really, really engrossed or really flooded with appreciation on a much different level. Okay. And I think all of us can relate to this. Those of us who've had issues with drugs, with gambling, with, maybe not being able to handle the noise of, like, say, sexual attraction, because it is a noise. It's like a neurological noise. And maybe even, like, say, those of us who have, like, say, narcissistic issues, where at times when we've been very, let's say, very insecure in life, we get overly preoccupied with our status, and maybe having insecurity about our status, let's say our social status or whatever, or our status, let's say, in our career, or, let's say how attractive we are, or whatever these things are, these kind of petty, almost vanity kind of things, but they can seem very important to us. And we get so engrossed in those things and so preoccupied that suddenly we just sort of, like, blocked out, like, all of the rest of our spiritual, sort of our spiritual context, basically. And so we could look at, like, say, a personality disorder as either like an interference. It could be an interference with our broader spiritual, let's say, context, or we could look at it as having an underdeveloped sense of an underdeveloped, stable identity as a spiritual being. Okay. Now, I am going to be the first to say that I do not think that most normal people need to worry too much about spirituality, right? I don't think normal people need to think much about it because, and this is why I'm not a big fan of religion, because religion kind of makes sort of like a big, like procedure of being spiritual, when I believe that a lot of normal people are just naturally very healthy and have healthy spirituality. In other words, I think everybody is spiritual. Okay. We don't need to be taught to be spiritual. We are all naturally spiritual. Okay. This idea that you have to discover spirituality, I think we are already spiritual as people. Okay. But the thing is that some people have, let's say, by their nature, they have interruptions and problems with their spirituality. Okay, where like say certain aspects of their spirituality kind of block out other aspects and cause disturbance. Let's say spirituality disturbances. Okay, but I think that people that are kind of neurotypical or more or less normal, I think they probably have a pretty stable, naturally stable spirituality. Okay, so they don't really need methods or techniques or enhancements, really. And probably just the natural challenges of life probably serve naturally to enhance their spirituality without coaching or methods. Okay, so I really do believe that for a lot of normal people, there's really no need to make a big science or an art of spirituality. That is just kind of sort of a native skill. Just like we don't need to take seminars and lessons to know how to walk. We just know how to walk. When walking is very complicated, actually. Walking, the actual mechanics of walking are very complicated. But most of us will develop very good walking without taking a seminar, without reading a book. And I think likewise with spirituality, I think for a lot of very neurotypical or very healthy people, I don't think it's necessary to be too introspective and to make too much of a science of spirituality, because I think it's kind of like walking. The more they do it and the more they live life, they're just naturally going to get better. Okay. But I think for a lot of people, and also the question is, who are those healthy people? I think a lot of very, very impressive people. Sorry about those. I'm so sorry. God. Those are not my dogs. I do not own dogs. Okay. But I live in a neighborhood. It is hard. It is hard. Personality disorder activated. Anyway. Okay. But I think we need to be careful, because I don't think we need to lightly assume whether or not we have healthy spirituality. Okay. Those of us who do have it, I think it's probably not that common, actually. So when we say neurotypical, I want to be careful. I don't want to say neurotypical. I want to say there are people who are neurologically very healthy, kind of like the equivalent of the athletes among us. The equivalent of the people that would make the first string varsity football team, the people in our population who would just end up being college athletes or things like that. That level of let's say mental health, exceptional mental health. I think those are the people that don't really need training or methods or techniques. I think life itself will develop their spirituality. But I think for most of us who don't have, like, say, exceptional or ideal, let's say, neurological functioning, I think most of us will probably deal with some level of a spiritual shortcoming, spiritual interference, interruption, incomplete spirituality, or disturbed spirituality. Okay. And so in my case, as I experience my cluster B experience, as I live my cluster B experience, okay, the way that spirituality for me has been affected, okay, is that I get so distracted by irritations, by attractions, by enthrallments. When I get enthralled, engrossed, when I get consumed by things that really capture my appreciation, okay. And this includes having been, let's say, sexually attracted to people, or let's say when I got into gambling, or when I have been preoccupied with things. When I was young, I was very preoccupied with being ambitious about having a career. There was a time when I wanted to be a pilot. There was a time when I was really big into mathematics. I got a degree in mathematics. I really wanted to be a mathematician. There was a time when I wanted to be a lawyer, whatever. But, whatever. When I've had things in my life that captured my my fascination, that captured my appreciation so much. It was almost like I got into I fell into a spiritual sinkhole, basically, where I got so consumed with spiritual appreciation that the noise of that, and it's like a noise, the noise of being engrossed in certain spiritual pockets, areas, basically just drowned out my mind and flooded my mind. So I lost my perspective and even my sense of an identity as a generally spiritual person. Okay. So kind of just falling into engrossments, basically. I say engrossment because you get engrossed, And I think engrossed is the right word, by the way. I think we become engrossed, and I think that's a question of noise signaling. If you have, like, say, you're not neurotypical, you're neuroatypical, okay? And let's say maybe my amygdala gets real noisy, around certain things. Well, of course, my prefrontal cortex is going to quiet down because I'm just taken over by this amygdala noise or whatever, and just so engrossed in whatever it is that's capturing my fascination at any moment. And so you sort of fall into these like spiritual sinkholes where you basically get engrossed in some very narrow aspect of spiritual appreciation, and the whole rest of all your panoramas and all your vistas and everything just evaporate, including maybe your identity as a spiritual person. So I will say this, I think for those of us who do struggle with behavior problems, who do struggle with, like, say, anything like a cluster B disorder, borderline narcissism, or anything like, say, ADD, okay, I think we need to be honest with ourselves, okay, and question whether maybe we have, because of our tendency to get engrossed in just small pockets of the spiritual landscape, let's say, the whole spiritual universe. God, I'm so sorry. It's horrible. These dogs. Anyway, I don't even know what to do. Okay. But if we tend to fall into these pockets, okay, where we get so engrossed in certain pockets of the spiritual universe, let's say, we need to seriously ask the question whether maybe we're lacking maybe a more reinforced spiritual identity. If maybe we need to sort of artificially develop, and this is artificial, we have to be artificial and be honest about that. But if maybe it would help us to be artificial and to develop maybe a stronger, more underlined sense of what is our spiritual identity, okay, and then really take it on, okay, and this would involve having to adopt sort of a practice, sort of adopting sort of a way of life as a reinforcement, which a lot of people do not have to do. Okay, understanding that those of us who are, like, say, I want to say the equivalent of the college athletes, the equivalent of the champions among us who don't have to do that. Okay, I get it, but those of us who know in our heart that we do have to adopt kind of an artificial, like a program or like a way of life, an adopted way of life, to sort of reinforce what we don't have because of our atypical neurology. Okay, so in my case, what suffers because I tend to get engrossed in certain areas of the spiritual landscape. Okay, I have to develop, and it sucks, and I don't like it, and I kind of want to resist it, but I have to sort of adopt a way of life and a reinforcement of an identity as a comprehensively spiritual person, not just a pocket spiritual person, but a comprehensively spiritual person. Okay. And to understand how, when I do fall into my pockets, okay, that those are not necessarily bad things, okay, but I have to still see them in perspective, have perspective. When I'm, say, in a pocket of being engrossed and enthralled by something that's really capturing my appreciation, flooding me, making a lot of noise, to see that as sort of like a pilot. Well, sometimes you got to fly through a cloud, but when you fly through a cloud, you don't forget that you're still navigating over planet Earth. Okay. You still have to remember that you still have to have navigation. Okay. So if I fly into a cloud, I still have to know where I'm located. I still have to continue navigating and remember there's mountains around me, and there's, a destination I've got to get to. And so it's like learning how to fly on instruments. Okay. where, if we reinforce our identity basically as our reference to the broader panorama, okay, when we do fall into these sinkholes of fascination and, rapture, whatever, spiritual appreciation, these pockets, basically we still continue to have the larger navigation, the larger orientation. And that to me is the reinforcement of the spiritual identity. So,